So welcome everyone. I'll ask Drain to do the opening karakia, please.
Tuia ki ronga, tuia ki raro, tuia ki roto, tuia ki waho, tuia tātou te tangata, ki te kaupapa o te hui nei, ki te kaupapa o te rangi nei, mauri ora, kia tātou katoa, bind above, bind below, bind within, bind beyond, bind us the people to the purpose of our meeting, to the purpose of this day, breathe life into all of us. Kia.
Thank you. So a warm welcome to everyone. I'll just run through some housekeeping things quickly. Firstly, so welcome to everyone. Welcome to those on Zoom. Rohan is on Zoom at the moment, and we do have the media in the room and on Zoom. Microphones muted unless you're speaking, and hands up for questions, please, and through the chair for anything else. Zoom attendees to turn off cameras and microphones during breaks. The location of the toilets is out and to the left. I've done the media. The hearing assistance hardware is available at the back of the room, or it used to be there by you, John. And in case of needing to evacuate, out the exit doors for a fire or anything else except an earth crate, and assemble at the rear of the Amarillos in the car park adjacent to the council. And for an earth crate, obviously drop, cover and hold. And with that, I think I've covered everything there. So apologies. I don't think there is any, other than we do have Mark Owen, who is NZTA representative, previously been our relationship manager, and you're representing Emma today, or taking Emma's place, Mark. So warm welcome.
Thank you.
Back. And no public forum. Any declarations of interest from anyone? Appears not. Late item. We do have a late item. The late item, Nelson Tasman Speed Management Plan deliberations be considered at today's meeting in accordance with section 46A(7) of the Local Government Official Information and Meeting Acts 1987 and Standing Order 9.12. The reason the item was not on the agenda is because the report was not ready in time, and the reason that the item cannot be delayed to a subsequent meeting is because the decision is time bound. Would someone like to move that we accept having that late item? Move Councillor Dowler. Seconded Mayor Smith. All those in favour will say aye. Against. Resolution is carried. Thank you. Confirmation of meetings. Bear with me. There are 4 of these. So the first one is the meeting of Monday, the 29th of April 2024. Do we have a mover? Move Councillor Dowler. Seconded Councillor Mayor Smith. All those in favour will say aye. Against. Carried. Extraordinary meeting Tuesday the 30th of April 2024. Moved Councillor Dowler. Seconded Mayor Smith. All those in favour please say aye. Against. Carried. May the 13th. Extraordinary. Moved myself. Seconded Mayor Smith. All those in favour say aye. Against. Carried. Confidential Monday the 13th of May. Moved Mayor Smith. Seconded Councillor Dowler. All those in favour will say aye. Aye. Against. Carried. Now I think we're going to go to the late item before we go to the submission. So Jane and Bill and Reith, you're all ready to go. So when you're ready, please. And it's page 4. Late agenda item. Jane, you're leading off. Thank you.
Yes, thank you for your time today. So we'll start by looking at our amended plan on the speed management. We want to submit our plan under the current rule because the new draft rule that came out on the 13th of June requires us to reconsult and has the need for further cost benefit analysis. We have the report before you. But we just want to run through some detailed points. So I'll start those. And I forgot to say through the chair, sorry.
Yeah.
Thank you. So we have extensively consulted on the draft plan. We went out for consultation at the end of November and we went through to the end of February. We received 2,247 submissions and we had our hearings at the end of April. The draft plan contained 4 options for the urban environment and 4 options for the rural environment. And we received the most support for urban option A and for rural option 1. We also had strong support for specific roads. But subsequently to the hearings, we had a series of workshops with the councils and also met with community boards in Tasman, and Nelson met with community associations. We then drafted a new plan. On the 13th of June, the Minister of Transport released the draft Transport Setting Speed Limits Rule 2024. And this proposes to revise the acceptable speed limits for different road classes, to reverse certain speed changes introduced since 2020, and retains a requirement to have variable limits outside schools. It also contains requirements for cost-benefit analysis and further consultation. We anticipate this draft may be in place, anticipate the final rule may be in place by October. So we've revised our amended plan, and that's before you today. We have received advice from NZTA, who said that they'll continue to certify plans under the current rule until the new rule is in place. We've had subsequent advice from the ministry saying that speed limits not registered will need to be reconsidered. And that is one of the submission points that we'll be covering later in the agenda. Our amended plan aligns with the draft rule along with the current rule. We recommend speed limit changes largely consistent with to reflect urban option A and rural option 1 with some other specific roads targeted. We propose for any implementation to happen from 2025 in order to minimise the risk of reversing any of the speed limit changes once the final rule is in place. We have 3 minor exceptions to the speed limit changes, which are not consistent with the draft rule, and these are outlined in our report and our submission to the ministry. The draft speed rule proposes cost-benefit analysis to be undertaken and consulted for each road for which speed limit change is proposed. We have completed a cost-benefit analysis already on our 8 consultation options. We've also completed a cost-benefit analysis on Tasman's higher risk rural roads. That analysis generally shows that speed limit reductions on urban roads generate negative benefit cost ratios, but this doesn't factor in mode shift or environmental benefits. Positive benefit cost ratios result from speed limit reductions on rural roads, including the high risk roads. We used NZTA's Monetised Benefit Cost Manual for our cost benefit analysis. The new draft rule proposes a bespoke methodology different from NZTA's approach. We recommend the amended plan and the schedule speed limit changes sent to the Joint Council Committee for approval. And the schedule speed limits outline the changes for individual roads. So this includes having 30k variable limits around schools, which aligns with the draft rule, but there are 3 minor exceptions to that. This includes unsealed roads which have tortuous alignment, reducing to 60 kilometres an hour, and this is consistent with the draft rule. Specific roads that are considered rural residential, peri-urban will be lowered to 50 or 60. This aligns with the draft rule, and we're seeking a minor amendment to the definition of peri-urban within our submission. Urban streets with no footpaths are reduced to 30 kilometres an hour, and this is a new category we're proposing for the draft rule. Our higher risk rural roads reduced to 80 kilometres an hour. The crash rate per million kilometres travelled for all of those roads is significantly higher than the other roads, such as the Appleby Highway. We've had a lot of requests to lower these roads, and the cost-benefit ratio, it's a positive cost-benefit ratio if speeds were to be lowered. Please note the correction that was sent on the schedule to Motueka Valley Highway that was sent out last night. For the on-road section, we're also proposing a new category for the on-road sections of the Great Taste Trail that are over 80 kilometres an hour, or a new category for the draft rule. We've got a reduction of Tasman's speeds in car parks down to 10 kilometres. And we've also got a list of specified roads that don't fit in the categories above. And this is to reflect roadside hazards, recreational use, changes to the urban or peri-urban environment, or we've picked up on small, tiny errors which are in the National Speed Registry. So we recommend the amended plan is adopted now to avoid the need to undertake further cost-benefit analysis and the need to reconsult. The current government has expressed a desire for efficiency. By adopting the plan now, we're able to meet community expectations to address the roads with unsafe speeds, as well as meeting the requirements of the draft rule. Please note that the finalised rules may have further amendments, and we may have a further requirement to consult. Our implementation will start after the finalised rule is in place, and our recommendations in the report before you are written, so each category can be decided on separately and can have alterations, such as if it is a specific road or a specific speed related to that road. We're happy to take any questions.
I'll start with Mayor Smith.
I'm struggling to read through all the papers and understand how this is going to roll out and work. When it refers to tranche 1 and tranche 2, I'm usually used to that term being, here's some things that we're going to do in a first batch and here's things that we're going to do in a second batch at a later time. Is that the intention around the language of tranche 1 and 2 in the papers we have before us?
Reece.
Through the chair, I think, Mayor Nick, you may be referring to the memo that I prepared for Nelson Council's last week that referred to a couple of tranches. We have since in the papers, there's a schedule, I think it's in Appendix 2, that details the time frame that each block of signs would be proposed to be installed. But effectively for Nelson, the tranche 1 would be all of the schools and Cable Bay Road and Mare Pa Road, and tranche 2 would be those urban roads that don't have a footpath, because that tranche 2 currently relies on our submission being successful and modifying the draft rule.
You know, but you're missing a fundamental question. What I want to do is I want to understand which streets, what speed limits, when. Really simple.
Yep.
Is tranche 1 and tranche 2 in the memo that you prepared for us intended to indicate a different timetable of implementation? So be yes or no?
No.
Or if it's not.
No. If on the assumption we are able to put a 30-kilometre-an-hour speed limit on roads with no footpaths, we would do them all.
So what is in your memo to us, what is meant by tranche 1 and tranche 2? It could be something different. Sometimes I might say that I'm doing an exercise in tranche 1 and tranche 2 is to differentiate them in a different context and time because they come under a different category. I'm just trying to understand.
Sure.
And so in referring to tranche 1 and 2, is it in respect of time or is it in respect of definition and consistency with rules or something different?
The definition and consistency with the current rules. So tranche 1 are things that we anticipate we can do that are signaled that we can do under the draft rule.
Yes.
And the tranche 2 is things that we would like to do and are hoping if our submission is successful, we are able to do, but we wouldn't do if the final rule doesn't allow it.
Good. Understand that. That's better. That's helpful.
It took a while to get there.
No,
Thank you, right. But just to further clarify, that was only sent to Nelson City Council as well.
Correct.
Yeah, because I'm
We're not-
lost otherwise, yeah.
Yeah, no, look, I'm just trying to understand because we're trying to do something in a bit of a rush to meet legislative rules, and that might be okay, but it's even more important we understand. My second question is, we're doing a large number of these variable speed limits around schools. Now, look, this may be me way off field, and I'm sorry if it's a dumb question. I'm just again trying to understand. What I see on the maps, for instance, for Nayland School and it's typical on many of the others, is that the variable speed limit goes for a small distance up adjacent suburban streets. I've got the main Nayland Road, and there is a whole series of little streets, whether it's Norwich or Exeter or the like. And on the map, it looks to me that you're going about 50 metres into them. The bit I'm struggling with a bit is my understanding is that these variable speed limit signs are quite expensive. And that where I've generally seen them, there's been fewer of them. Is it the intention in an area like Nayland or any other where we're having the variable speed limit signs, and we take that variable speed limit, a block or a few houses up the adjacent streets, that every one of those connector streets are going to have a flashing variable speed sign?
Through the chair, no. So we would put the flashing electronic signs typically on the main road. So in the Nayland Road example, would have one at each end on Nayland Road. And then on those side roads, it's still a variable speed limit from a regulatory point of view. We have a static time that has the signs on it. So that's what we have now, except at the moment they are defining a 40 kilometre an hour, 50 kilometre an hour speed limit. That would change to define the 30, 50 speed limit and whatever times are appropriate.
My last question is to give some sense of timing. Joint Regional Transport Committee ticks it off this today, then goes off to a joint meeting of councils, gets ticked off. What's a reasonable timetable? And again, I'm sorry, I'm parochial and quite Nelson focused and questions. If you want to go into the Tasman territory, I don't mind. That's entirely for the discretion of the Tasman guys. What's a realistic time frame for those, one, the limits that come into effect in the signage associated with them to come? Is it within 12 months? Is it within a couple of years? Give me a sense.
So through the chair, so for Nelson, we have them all pretty much been rolled out effectively in a year's time. So during the school holidays, during the July school holidays, and they will come live. We've put in the schedule here the 14th of July. So we're giving ourselves a year because I imagine there's going to be a whole bunch of different communities wanting to purchase electronic signs. So we're giving ourselves a year to plan and to roll it out, with them all going live on the 14th of July. Now,
14th of July 25.
Correct. I'll let Tasman
and including
because I think they'll just
and is that the same implementation date that's intended for our other little speed change around Cable?
Cable Bay, yes. The urban roads with no footpaths, if we're able to, yes. If we're not able to, then they wouldn't occur.
July next year. Thank you.
Nothing further.
Through the chair for Tasman, we've taken it for rural schools. They would be occurring next year, and then for our urban schools, it will be the year after that, as indicated in the schedule too.
Right. Thank you, Jane. Any further questions? Councillor O'Neill Stevens. How do I know that?
Just one from me, really getting to the heart of the sort of where this proposal sits in relation to the proposed or incoming speed rule is, could we go in any area any further than what is proposed under that new rule? Or is this sort of as far as we could make changes?
Is that the rule relating to around schools, you mean?
As in the ministers, with what we're submitting on, the minister's new rule that is currently open for consultation under its current settings relative to this plan, is this as far as we could go?
It was never crack of that, Bill.
Yeah, through the chair, it is largely as far as we can go, and in a couple of instances, as Reece has indicated, it's probably a little bit further than the rule would allow, and we're submitting on that to try and get that through.
Thank you.
Sorry, may I add to that? There are the indicative speed ranges in the draft rule would suggest that there are some other places that we could lower speed limits, but we have to be mindful that we're also taking note of the feedback received from this committee, our councils, and the community at large. So there is some it is like a Venn diagram. We're trying to find the sweet spot between the current rule, draft rule, and the feedback we've got from different parties, including our community.
Reece.
Through the chair, maybe if I just add a wee bit of Nelson context. So there could be potential for some of our busier urban roads to drop them to 40, but as a end up with some spots probably not consistent with consistency issue.
Any further questions?
Just to note, something was up with that microphone and I got none of that, what I'm sure was a wonderfully articulate answer.
Shall we try again? We'll try.
Let's try that again. Hopefully that's okay. You give me a thumbs up. Fabulous. So in the Nelson context, I think there are some roads that we could have dropped to 40 kilometres an hour where we have high volumes of cyclists and pedestrians. We would have had a bit of a consistency challenge, I think, if we did kind of chase that particular draft rule. And so we haven't elected to do that.
Mine's on. Did you get all of that? Excellent, thank you. Nothing further? Right, anyone have any further questions? If not, I think we'll look to the resolutions. Have been advised that staff would think it's appropriate that we go from 1 to 5 and then 6 taken parts. That and these are all sort of what's the word? What's the word I want? Not procedural. It's something like that. What's the word? I can't think of it. Too much pressure.
So just to elaborate a little bit further, the first few resolutions are really about
The plane.
yeah, noting things that have gone down, some of the risks involved, and importantly in resolution 5, agreeing that we won't be pursuing what the draft plan had, which was C for urban area and 3 for the rural area. So make an explicit resolution that that is not the plan you intend to move forward with. From 6, or all of 6 really, the reason we suggested taking it apart is just so that you can turn your mind to each of those specific classifications of road and make sure that you're happy with those individually. And potentially, if there is any particular road or adjustment to a road needed, then we have the ability to put an except for, and maybe some comments in there to reflect the will of the committee. 7 just says you'll allow us to, you allow the chair and deputy chair to tweak anything as necessary to give effect to the 2 previous resolutions. And finally, the last set of changes is really just recommendations to the joint committee closing out that process.
Thank you. So I'm happy to move 1 to 5. I think we've been through quite a extensive process to get to this position today, starting in the last year, what year we're in, 2023. I think we started not long after the election. Oh no, it wasn't elections. In the last quarter of December 23, and then we had some discussions around the changes that come out promoted by the new government, but decided to continue on with it under the previous rule, and now we're working under, and the submission, the changes relate to both, really, I think is probably the fairest way to put it. been quite a challenge for us around this table for the councils to get their heads around. And really do appreciate the work that staff have done to assist us, particularly here at Tasman, and I guess it'll be similar at Nelson. We've had a number of workshops and formal meetings, probably even more than we would normally have, because it has been quite complex, but I believe we're getting to a good place. It's just taking time. Any other speakers on 1 to 5?
Mr. Chairman, happy to support. Look, the issue of speed is a challenging balance of interests. There's no question that speed does have an impact on safety. The faster you go, the bigger the mess. But we also, in developing our speed management plan for our region, need to get some sense also of scale. I was quite taken back when officials told us that there is 1.05 billion kilometres of vehicle travel each year in our region. A million's quite a lot. A billion is quite mind-boggling for a community of the 115,000 people between Nelson and Tasman. And even though it may sound very easy, and you say, well, safety must come first. What's 10 kilometres an hour? It's only 2 or 3 minutes for a journey. And then you do the numbers and said that, well, if we reduced all of the speed limits by 10 kilometres per hour right across the district, that amounts to another 24 hours for each of our citizens driving. That's actually quite a lot, another extra full day of people driving. And that just wants to reinforce to me that it is an issue of balance. The most interesting part of the process for me that we went through was in April when we got some solid cost benefit analysis, because it is quite difficult to sort of weigh up as to, well, how much weight, what reduction in the number of accidents, vis-a-vis what level of extra time, and when I put all those factors in and the benefits, how does it stack up? And I found it fascinating that in urban areas, certainly for Nelson, the costs of the reduced speed limits were 9 times what the benefits were. And that to me says, well, actually, I do have to listen and weighing this up as to that sort of quite rational analysis. I think, and I'm particularly sympathetic for our Tasman colleagues, because there's been conversations in places like Ngatamoti and Mauriha about speed limit reductions for a long time. I'm a little bit uncomfortable about pressing ahead of where the government has been, but on balance, the reason I back my Tasman colleagues is that conversation's been going on in those communities for a long time. I don't have the heart to tell them, hey, wait another year or two, even though a counter argument is the government is changing the rules, and for us to just get this batch of changes through prior to the change of rules, in normal circumstances, I would be uncomfortable with that. But because of the length of conversation there has been, I think they make good sense. So in summary, Mr. Chairman, the reason I'm supporting this resolution is I actually think it's a pretty balanced and sensible outcome in the package of work that's been done by our officers. There will be some safety benefit. There will be some increased inconvenience and some time for some, but it is a balanced package, and that is why we should support it.
Thank you. And that support includes settling the resolutions. Thank you. Councillor O'Neill Stevens.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Look, I'm going to support this, but at the same time, I don't necessarily support this. In that, I think if I reflect on the conversation, the speed journey that our community has been on, whether it be the advocacy around lowering the speeds on State Highway 6 between here and Blenheim, a really clear-cut example of where the cost benefit of that has stacked up incredibly well, and we've seen far less deaths and serious injuries on that stretch of road as a result, to our consultation dropping the central city speed limits and home zones in Nelson, and the great benefit to amenity within the central city that we've seen from that. And the fact that at that point we decided to pause because we knew that there was this mythical new rule coming in, and that would make it so much easier to set speed limits. So we held off on progressing on any wider view, despite strong urging from a number of communities that they wanted to see their speed limits drop. That rule took a long time to come into force, and it's taken a short time to come out of force. And that is one of the deeply frustrating things where we see these swings in policy directly impacting local government. Like speed is a very complex topic. We can't, and doing simple maths often doesn't stack up as to how it relates to congestion and to wider traffic movements. These are complex systems. But it is very directly tied to safety and amenity. And I think that there's parts in this plan where we could go further to reflect our community's interests. The reason I'll support this, and equally the reason I'll be saying we should go harder in our next item, is because the staff and the team of officers behind this have responded really effectively to the signalling coming from the government. We know that we're not going to have the same level of local control to determine our speeds as I think we should, and as we previously had. And so as a result, this plan responds effectively to those constraints, despite my personal desire, and I think the indication from actually a lot of parts of our community that they want to see greater change. For now, we'll chart a path that I think balances those aspirations against the constrictive hand of central government.
Thank you, Councillor Ellis.
Thank you, through you, Chair. I'd like to reiterate the point. This has been a mammoth process, and I'd like to thank staff for the approach that they've taken. I think we've come to a really pragmatic solution regarding these speed limit changes, and I'm really pleased with what the outcome has actually wound up being. I would like to take this opportunity to thank the public, who we went out in consultation over a time period that I'm never in favour of, over the Christmas break. And they fed back some really good information and their wants and their needs in their communities to help make these decisions. I'm really pleased that we can deliver for the schools. I think those speed limit drops are so important to keep our students safe and to tidy up those anomalies that we've seen, especially in the Tasman district, on roads that really the speed limits don't reflect the actual speeds that those roads are being travelled at, or a relatively safe speed for those communities. So I'm really pleased to see that happen. And as part of that, I'd also like to send a special message to the students at Ngātamoti School, who have sat in this room on numerous occasions and have at times wondered why they keep coming back and asking for the speed limit outside their school to change. Well, I hope they see that coming here and doing it has made a difference. And I'm just sorry that it has taken quite so long, given what this process has meant and the changes coming through from the government. So I'm really proud of the work that staff have done and this committee's done to actually see this coming through. So thank you.
Councillor Dowler, did you want to speak? No. Anyone, anything further? Just small right of reply. Yeah, I think Councillor Ellis has summed it up pretty well. It's been an extended time frame. We've heard from a huge amount of people, responded as best we can, where we can. As Ngātamoti's been particularly thorn and a particular challenging issue for a number of years. So to get that sorted out will be really good. And all rural schools to have the ability to have a lower speed and some form of effective signage will be really appreciated by all those communities. So just thank everyone again, staff, our public that have made submissions for the effort that they've all put in, and for the members around this table and the two councils. Yet to go through that, but hopefully we'll get this there in time, and I get a favourable response from the, is it the minister or who's the response come from? The director?
The Director of Land Transport, who's
Right.
NZTA.
Any indication how long that might be? No, okay, because that's right, I should really be asking questions, but anyway, with that, I'll put the resolutions, all those in favour will say aye. Against, resolution is carried, thank you. Now, I've just been thinking about 6, Jane, well, and the associated roads. Would it be best if anyone had any road they particularly had an issue around? I think. Because I think they'll generally be supported. Or was the one you particularly wanted separated out?
No, none in particular. It was just to provide councillors with the opportunity.
Right. I'm certainly supportive of that's and the exemptions for Ellis Street and Richmond's Brightwater, Richmond and Wakefield schools. I'm familiar with them all, and there's just a bit of tweaking there. Tortuous unsealed roads, rural residential, peri-urban, and so on. And certainly the section about the Great Taste Trail, that'll be really good to be able to lower that in some of our roads, particularly where they're unsealed. And then, of course, the table will go to the director as well, I'm assuming. Councillor Butler.
Thank you. Yes, thank you. A lot of this does apply to rural roads, which up until now, or up until this comes into force, have actually had 100k speed signs, which really is the old paradigm, which was just don't take any notice of the 100, just drive to the conditions. And you know, I'd just like to say that to acknowledge all the work that's been done for trying to find out what the actual speeds have been for some of these country roads, that they're actually travelled at maybe about 30 or 40k and they've got a 100k sign. So I think that moving forward and actually getting speed limits for these roads is something that the community's been asking for, as Mayor Smith says, for a long time. We're not going to get it, doesn't get it all right everywhere. And as you'll be aware, the Port Tarakoe situation is something that doesn't fit in very well to the draft rule. And that will probably be an ongoing issue. But on the whole, from the rural road point of view, I think that it's a huge leap forward. So I think, you know, I'd support the committee actually adopting these.
Yeah, I think too, that point that you made there around the speed limits are a lot closer the way we went through them award to the current operating speeds than the 100k previously. The new limits will be much closer to, or I think pretty much in all cases was somewhat above the operating speeds, but not a long way away, unlike the 100k. So unless anyone particularly wants to have one of these as a separate resolution, I'm thinking I can put 6 and 7 together and put that resolution. No one has any objections?
Can I just check on the process, Mr. Chairman?
Yep, and then Mark from NZTA has got a question as well. So.
And that is, these next set of resolutions are passed, and so they become recommendations to the joint committee, or do they go separately to the two councils?
They go to the joint council meeting on the 23rd of July.
And on that occasion, let's say there's a decision to be made and someone moves an amendment about a specific road. The decision on that road is made by all 26 members of the joint committee.
Correct. I mean, it's a simple majority, as would normally be the case, applies.
Yep.
Nothing further.
Yeah. I tell you, one thing I'm a little worried about is just becoming a bit overwhelmed for that committee meeting for colleagues that haven't been on the Regional Transport Committee before those final decisions. How practical would it be for us to make up maps, for us to be able to see this? I'm just trying to get the information into a form of which the full range of councillors around the table are going to. Now, if the intent, and begs this be chaired by Mayor King, that you start getting individual amendments and councillors trying to scramble whether we support it for there or the like, is it, I'm assuming it would be in order for someone to move an amendment at that meeting, in which case, how practical would it be for that joint regional transport committee to have maps of all of these with the changes?
From a Tasman perspective, after this meeting, we'll be talking to our GIS team to see if we can get our maps updated by that 23rd.
Right.
I think Nelson.
It's through the chair. Yes, our maps are complete. So the maps that were in that memo are good to go.
Good. And so the papers that will go out to the joint council meeting will have all the maps in it?
We had envisaged that it would be this agenda with a cover note. I wonder whether we do a PowerPoint presentation to, I guess, simplify the process so that you're not overwhelmed by a 100-page agenda, so we can kind of really get to the nubs of the issue, I guess. Could be an option.
I'd just like to see it facilitated in a way in which councillors that have not been part of this journey for the last 6 months are going to be able to get their heads up. My preference would be maps, and my preference would be for staff to prepare something of a overhead presentation so that we can equally bring them up to speed and bring the process to a conclusion would be my preference, Mr. Chairman.
Through the chair, I hear you loud and clear. The only reason you don't have maps at this meeting is because so much required work in 3 weeks. We didn't have a chance to produce the maps for Tasman in particular for this meeting, but understand the intent and absolutely agree it's a better way to communicate the change.
No, thank you.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. It's only a minor point, but one that we've struggled with in the past. Do we have a clear definition of rural and urban? And is that documented somewhere? So we talk about urban roads here with no footpaths. Are we really clear about what the definition of urban is? Because previously we used to base it on speed limits, and that defined the difference between urban and rural. So I'm just curious to know whether, do we need to define it, and is it written down somewhere?
So when we prepared our list, we were using mega maps, and so it was the classification that was in a mega maps, which I believe came from the One Network framework. And as we've gone through it, in our tables, which aren't shown here, there is the road classification, and if it needs a change, it is captured, and that would be the information we're giving back to NZTA.
So through the chair, we're talking about the One Network framework classification. Thank you.
Thanks. It was just a follow-on from Nick's question. If I was a councillor who hadn't been part of these committee meetings, what would be really helpful is the EMAPs that went out with the consultation document. Those were incredibly helpful, and I know that where we're landing now is a hybrid between a few different options that were in there. How difficult would it be to actually get those tweets so that they could just look on there and scroll around and take a look?
That's what we're going to be working with our DIS team to see if we can update that. Yeah.
Yeah, I apologise. It probably should have come to you and Jane and Bill before this, but in the page 49, we talk about Quayle Street. Page 50, we're at the top, Wakawera Street. For some reason, Wakawera Street's now 50 kilometres an hour for its entirety, when we were only talking about a small portion down the end. And Quayle Street, page 40, that was page 50. And back on page 49 was Quayle Road, Quayle Street. It's gone down to 50 for its entirety. I thought 3 councillors asked for it to stay at 60. And I can't find Wildman Road anywhere.
I'll go back and check those, Barry. I apologise.
Yeah, because Wildman Road changes from 70 to 60 halfway down, and it's not mentioned in there at all, that I can see, unless I've missed it.
Yeah, my understanding was that portion of Whakaroa speak right at the end.
Yeah.
And
It says it's in its entirety here.
Yeah.
On that piece.
so that, yeah, that the small errors that I thought had been corrected, but we'll go back. Sorry, Barry.
But in the minor amendments of need to be.
That's why we've got number 7. Just
Yeah, yeah.
it has a catch-all or
Right. Anything, when we get to, so we're going to put resolution 6 in its entirety along with 7. It's been moved and seconded. Hasn't been? Oh, who moved? Councillor Dowler. Seconded myself. Any further discussion on those 2 resolutions in their entirety? If not, I'll put the resolution. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Against? Carried. Now we'll move to the approval of this.
that including the recommendations of John Committee.
No, just 6 and 7.
Hang on. You sure you got that right? Yeah. So now we're going to the approval of the submission, are we?
Sorry, the new resolutions 1 through to 3 to the joint.
Oh, right, now I'm with you, sorry.
Yep.
Just give us a second for everyone to read that. Hang on, is that will just go to the joint committee? We don't really.
No, so correct. So this is where you are formally recommending to the joint committee they adopt the plan,
And
they approve the speed limit changes and a few administrative aspects in resolution 3 there, so they can correct some stuff and do a few tweaks. And
administrative, that was the word I wanted before.
My difficulty with the final speed management plan is it, and I'm not sure its significance, is it translates a huge amount of language that went over in the consultation document into the plan. And so, for instance, there's a huge of information about the impacts on deaths and injury, but there's none of the balancing information. Do we have to include that information in there? Because I sort of feel as that when you read the plan now, you went out with a consultation document, which was, I'm sorry, close to an advocacy piece for quite radical reductions in speed limits. It's not where we landed, and you're now sort of trying to bolt on to the original commentary a set of outcomes that are quite different. Now, my preference would be that our officers go away and sort of redraft it and to say, and you've got to weigh up, because my view is this has always been a weighing up of how much safety you get vis-a-vis how much extra time you take people. So I'd be interested to know as to is all that material required to be in the speed management plan? How much work would it be to try and balance it? Or what's a solution out of this? And equally, I'm interested in other elected members as to whether they have that unease as well.
Jane, I think you've made, I know you answer, then I'll make.
Through the chair, that piece on the benefits of safe speed, that was always in the draft plan that we went out with consultation. There is a section, on productivity and economics, also in the draft plan that went out. That piece has been updated to reflect what was the outcome of our cost benefit analysis, but it was always in the draft plan because we had 2 documents. We had the consultation document and the draft plan. So those 2 documents are publicly available.
So you've tried to merge some from each of those.
It's not so much a merger, but it was always in the draft plan. Yeah.
From a process perspective, if look, I'll acknowledge that we were rushing to get this plan. We focused more on the changes than we did on trying to redraft the speed management plan fundamentally itself. To better reflect that, we went out with a option 3 and C, and now we've pulled back closer to something more like an A and a 1. If the committee wanted us to make edits, then I would probably recommend a resolution 8 before we go to the recommendations to the joint committee that explicitly request that that there's some trimming in the document, and I'll have to come up with some wording to give effect to it. That says basically authorizes probably the chair and the deputy chair, most logically, to authorize changes to the speed management plan to reduce the amount of content related to X, Y, and Z. That would be the quickest way to do it. Otherwise, we end up having to come back and get this committee to resolve it again.
The other concern I would have is about capability to do it within capability to do it within that time frame.
I mean, before the 23rd, that gives us about a week, I think, a week and a bit to get the reports and stuff done. We could probably make tweaks and get them authorised by the chair and deputy chair to do that in that time. But it would, I suspect, require the committee to authorise yourselves to sign off on those changes and a clear enough instruction for staff to go about making them.
Can I just ask a question? Legally, in a speed management plan, what level of detail is required in that commentary on the front end?
Oh, that's probably a question for you.
Yes, through the chair, there is no specific requirement. There is some, I guess, requirement to include some reasoning for the plan and the contents of it. But there is little guidance in terms of details and what they should include.
I'm really keen to meet the timetable. Don't want to be a pain and have officials spending weeks on it. On the other hand, if we can, within the motion that's already proposed, where the chair and the deputy chair has got the capacity to be able to amend it, would be, look, I've got a great deal of faith in our officers. Just get the officers just to, in the rush to get the important detail of the decisions made on the specific speed limits for the route, that's been made the priority, rather than necessarily getting the commentary consistent with it. Is just get our officers just to rerun their eyes over it, with only the discretion to change to ensure it's consistent with the decisions that were being made.
Yep, sounds good. Everyone supportive? So, Elaine? Rohan, Councillor O'Neill Stevens?
I guess the one thing I'm struggling with is, like, everything in there is factually accurate. It's, we're drawing on just research. I wouldn't be comfortable pulling out anything that's in there about, the fact that a speed limit at 30 kilometers an hour is less likely to kill someone. Even though the ultimate decision has been that for most of our roads, we're keeping them at 50. That context hasn't the veracity of it hasn't changed. And I'm just reading through, you do still have the wider context. Like, I'd be okay with adding in more commentary as to how decisions were made, but I'd be very uncomfortable with pulling out relevant safety statistics as they relate to speed, because that is part of the story here.
My difficulty, just to be direct, Rohan, is that we've got 3.5 pages of information around all of the crash data, and 3 very short paragraphs, a third of a page, on the economic costs. And my fundamental difficulty is, I'm sorry, that's disproportionate. That number that came out through the process, where we're talking about over 1 billion kilometres per year. So it's that imbalance. It's not that I want to squeeze information out. It's just that I'm very keen to see it be a balanced approach. And having 3 pages on safety and a third of a page on the economics is way out of step with both the decisions and the rebalancing that is also relevant to the next issue we discuss. So I'm not sure how officials try and do that.
If I may offer a solution, Mr. Chair.
Always try.
Yeah, cool. So, I mean, I come back to if that's the scope of the change of sort. I mean, if the committee would resolve to authorise the chair and deputy chair to approve additional information on the economic impacts of speed limit changes, and the committee was comfortable with it, then I think that would work just fine.
Rohan, I could even leave with 3 pages on safety and 1 pages on economics, even though pages still feel. But
as I've said, I'm happy for further inclusion of wider information. It's the removing information that concerns me, but happy if it's just that further addition.
Okay, we're getting nods around the table. Do we need an official resolution around that, Robin or Elaine? Or
I think we've got the room to go there, and I think there is the goodwill around the table to give our officials a shot at just trying to get a bit more of a balanced flavour to it. Taking on board Rohan's point, you're not to remove any stuff, but if we can get it to a bit more balance and a bit more, so that the main thing for me is that the commentary is consistent with the decisions.
If the committee is comfortable with that, then I think officers can take that comfort.
thank you, Councillor Butler. Sorry.
Just in regards to 3C, I'm just wondering if this is referring to something that will happen. I'm talking about the resolution that the joint committee. Sorry, 3C of the resolution 3C. That's something that would happen quite a long way down the track. It's following the introduction of the final speed rule, and it doesn't actually give any context about how that process would happen, the removal of components of the speed management plan, if not able to be implemented following the introduction of the final speed rule. So that I presume means that if the final speed rule rules out some of the changes in our plan, then who would actually take those out? Would that, it looks as if that would not require a resolution from the joint committee or from the councils to do that. And I do just wonder about whether or not that 3C should be removed from the resolution. I don't know, just I'd like to see the reason for it.
Yeah, the rationale was that we've got a bit of a process to get through, and there'll be a final speed limit rule issued, and that hopefully takes on board the submission points that you're about to prove, fingers crossed, that says, we shouldn't have to reconsult on this stuff. Like, it's in line with your proposed speed guidance, and the exceptions have good reasons behind them. But if that final speed rule simply does not authorise it, or even after we've gone through consultation, the director doesn't view it as consistent with the speed rule and doesn't approve it, it is simply a resolution to say, well, instead of having a plan hanging out there in space, it says something, but in reality we can't do it. It just gives the chief executive the ability to strike it from the plan. But that would only be once we've attempted to get it approved. Reece, did you want to add anything to that?
Through the chair, no, you've explained that well, and I think the key point there was, just not creating work, having to come back to the committee to, undo something that we've tried to do in the hope that the rule is going to allow it.
Through the chair, I agree with Councillor Butler. I think it is a little bit open-ended. I think it gives a lot of delegation to the CEO to take that to the extreme. Not that they would, but I think it needs just a bit of clarity around the purpose and intent of it, so it's really clear about what scope of change could be proposed.
I guess the thing is, though, that the CEO would be getting the appropriate advice from someone around that within the council, I'd have thought, Drain, before making that decision.
That's right. So it'll only be once we've gone through the process and it's really apparent what the outcome or not that's able to be pursued is. So, it would be I imagine it should be really clear to all parties involved that we've exhausted opportunities to get it approved, and it really is just a machinery change to the plan at that point. I think you're going to have to trust staff and the chief executives a little bit to follow through with the council's intent before it invoked that.
It does seem that it's quite a sophisticated, for the want of a better word, process. Councillor Hudson.
Could it just say, you know, allows the removal of components of the plan that are inconsistent with the final speed rule? Because at the moment it just says components, and it's the inconsistent bits that we would want to remove.
Through the chair, look, we could add. I would not want the bit, if not able to be implemented, to be removed, because actually that's quite important. There's a test implied in that you know we have tried and failed to get it registered. But I do take your point that the category of speed limit changes we're talking about here are the ones that are likely to be not authorised, those that are inconsistent. So if you want to add some wording along those lines, happy.
Thank you, Councillor Ellis.
Thank you. I mean, this makes sense to me. However, I do have that position where we've chosen roads where the communities have actually asked for these to happen. And if the speed limit rule comes through, our communities want for those lower speed limits, because we've not gone out and changed them all willy-nilly. There's a reason that each one has been selected. And I worry that those people that have asked for it, it's just, oh, well, the rules have changed and we can't do it. And I actually think those communities deserve a bit more to have the opportunity for us to keep pushing, because they make sense. But I agree with the actual intent behind what this original recommendation is. But I'm curious, what would be the process for those communities that they get told by the government, well, actually, we're not going to make a speed limit change, but they've already proven that it's necessary. So where's the reassurance, or where is the comeback for those communities that could potentially be caught up in that?
I think that have to come back to council, and we'd have to have a look at that, because I think this is really the last stop, really. And if it can't be done for a number of reasons, that's where it would go to the CEO. Certainly something like this committee and council's operation committee, in our case, would try every avenue possible if they could. I'd have thought. And no. Yeah. So you've made a minor change to the wording there, Dwayne.
Yeah, through the chair, just adding in that the category of speed limit changes we're talking about are those that are inconsistent with the final speed limit rule and a double test and able not to be implemented. Because it is entirely possible there are some changes that are inconsistent, but for whatever reason, the director authorises them. So we're just putting in both in there.
Okay. Anyone do?
Can I just use one more thing in there? I'm very relaxed and like the idea that the chief executive is going to be able to do that. I'm sorry. I'm quite relaxed about the resolution. The only thing is, where does the report back to get to elected representatives? And I wonder whether we could actually be quite specific and say, allows the removal of components of the speed management plan that are not able to be implemented following the introduction of the photo, and that I don't care whether it's original, but just so that we're in the loop as to, oh yeah, that the reason that one didn't go ahead.
Yep.
And so I wondered whether, and notify the relevant elected members, and notifies the relative elected members and the Regional Transport Committee. And what I mean by the relevant is
like
that
if there's a ward councillor,
if there's a ward councillor in Golden Bay, that those couple of councillors in Golden Bay, if it's in my area in Stoke, or the ward councillor, but also I think this Regional Transport Committee, because we'll also then get a sense as to how many of them are being bowled over.
Yep, sounds good. Right. With that, I'm going to put those resolutions to go to the joint council meeting or joint committee meeting of the two councils. So all those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Oh, we haven't got to move for a second. Really? Yeah, let me get that fast. Well, I'm happy to move. Councillor Dale is happy to second. All those in favour will now say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Again, resolution's carried. Thank you, Robin. Now we will move to the submission, approval of submission on the draft setting of speed limit rules. Bill and Jane, yes, both here again, and Jamie. And Reese, Reese and Jamie. Who's leading off? Bill?
Yep, thank you, Chair. We'll take this this report as read. Just a couple of brief background comments. Some of the points in the rule have already, or in the submission, have already been discussed through the previous item. The draft rule was released, as Jane said, 13th of June. Consultation is open until this coming Thursday, the 11th of July. So hence the comparatively hasty process that we're going through at the moment. So some key points within the draft setting speed limits rule. It requires a cost benefit assessment for changes of speed limit. But that cost benefit, or the methodology proposed for that cost benefit assessment, is not consistent with the methodology within NZTA's monetized benefit cost manual, which is the rule book that NZTA uses for assessing projects or the economics of projects. The draft rule requires variable 30km/h speed limits outside schools and specifies the times that they are to be in operation. It allows for ministerial speed objectives. It has some transitional provisions which reverse some speed limits that are currently in place. And those are on state highways and in 30km/h urban areas. And are limits that have been in place or were put in place after the beginning of 2020. The advice that we have received regarding the limits is that, or regarding our speed management plan, as Jane has indicated, is that NZTA would consider the plan for certification if it's submitted before the new rule comes into force. But the Ministry of Transport has indicated that the intent of the rule, although it's not actually stated in it, and I suspect that the rule may change in the final iteration, the intent of the rule is that speed limits which have not been registered, which is being included on the setting of, the National Speed Limit Register, that those limits will need to be reconsidered. So there's a little bit of a question mark about that. And the draft rule does not include some roads that we have included in our speed management plan, and that's those rural residential roads that are not adjacent to urban areas, the roads urban roads with no footpaths, and those roads with a significant cycleway on them. So that's a brief summary of some of the points in the submission, and open to take questions.
Yes, Smith.
My first question is with respect to the submission you're wanting to make about what's in the cost benefit analysis. I'm concerned that we are arguing that issues of urban amenity and mode shift should be considered in cost benefit analysis. Now, I'm a real cynic of what I'd rather do is have an economic analysis that I know what's in it and what's measurable, and be quite open that there'll be things outside of that band. The classic example for me was when Treasury tried to put a value on the Able Tasman National Park. And I'm sorry, a very difficult thing to do because people will have very different views about what the value of the park is. Now, with respect to, so my view is urban amenity is almost impossible to put a commercial dollar sum value for a cost benefit analysis. And with mode shift, we can certainly put a value on the reduction in emissions. If I go take a bike rather than a car, X number of tonnes, and can do so. Why would we want to do mode shift as well as emission reductions?
So through the chair, the concern with the different methodologies is that the monetised benefit cost manual takes the benefits and subtracts the disbenefits and divides them by the costs. The proposed methodology in the rule takes the benefits and divides them by the cost, which is both the implementation cost and the cost to the community of things like travel time changes.
Yep.
So that when you're comparing those, the two answers, they are quite different answers. And so if you're comparing a benefit cost assessment that's been done under the monetised benefit cost manual, the typical way that we do transport projects, with the benefit cost analysis it's done under the speed limit setting rule, the answer is quite different, and you're not comparing apples with apples. So that's the concern there. But we're just also saying that there are other considerations that need to be taken into account, and I agree totally that there is not a realistic way of monetising those, but we need to bear them in mind and consider them.
Just to clarify, we're not actually suggesting that, not actually suggesting that it tries to be included in the cost benefit analysis. We're suggesting that those things be considered alongside the cost benefit analysis. So it's just another factor to take into account, not try and monetize the unmonetizable.
Mm. And why do we believe that the alternative cost benefit analysis that's in the more speed management rule is inferior to NZTA's monetarised benefit and cost manual? Because I've had Mooney argue the opposite. Why are we taking a view that one is superior to the other?
Through the chair, I guess neither of them is wrong. And I guess we're taking if you want to compare, for example, if you have a road which has a high crash rate and you're looking at ways to address that, and you do a benefit cost analysis of, say, some curve realignment or seal widening or something like that, and then compare that with the benefit cost assessment for the speed management, those two things are not easily comparable. So I guess that we're arguing for consistency and arguing that the methodology that's been used for many years in terms of transport economics is the appropriate one. Now, it may be that we can change the monetised benefit cost manual to reflect the other methodology.
Mm.
And I guess the other thing that sits in the monetised benefit cost manual is that it really separates out the costs that apply to the road controlling authority from the benefits that are derived to the community.
Mm. The other line, I'm sorry, look, I'm not. In respect of the smaller low volume roads, why is it not possible? Because it is true that as a consequence, the safety benefit of lower speed limits is less, but also the economic cost is less. Why is it not possible on the smaller roads that have lesser volumes of traffic, the dead ends and the shorter roads, to have a general analysis that applies to roads of that sort? In other words, when I go to a data analysis, what you're saying is that, well, for a short road, let's say Bronte Road, we don't get many accidents on it, so it's very difficult to get data for us to be able to do a cost benefit. But what you can do is to say, well, we've got 50 dead end roads of this sort, and they make up 5% of our roading network, and they make up 8% of the accidents, or whatever it might be.
Bill, I'm happy to respond to that. I think the point we're making that Transport Agency has been doing economic assessment of transport projects for years. They have a consistent methodology for doing that. We're recommending that the speed limit assessment is developed by Waka Kotahi in a way that's consistent. Now, their economic evaluation manual, I don't think anyone prints it out anymore, but it is 2 or 3 inches thick. It has a series of simplified procedures which address the very issue that the Mayor has raised. When something is less complex, it's a basic issue, you can apply those simplified procedures. They've got much more complex procedures for larger projects comparisons, and they've got some specialist procedures that can be applied. So I think our message is that the agency does this and does this well, and it's important that actually they're the ones that develop these to enable that consistency and to enable those projects be, it's an apples versus apples comparison.
My concern is that you're asking us to sign off on a submission that says we don't want to do any sort of cost benefit analysis on these roads, on these dead end, shorter, long exit roads.
Through the chair, look, I put this one in, so I'm happy to answer the question.
Yeah.
It was just to have a pragmatic de minimis, where there are some small changes. You might change 50 metres of a length of road on a dead end cul-de-sac, and it just feels, you know, the amount of cost required potentially and time involved is doing the cost benefit analysis is out of proportion with the change that you're looking at. So it was just simply to have a pragmatic de minimis in it. It was really, I don't really have a view about where that crossing point is, you know, where that line is, but it was to raise it for the ministry to consider.
Sure. Well, can I suggest that the under bullet point 5 on the recommendations on the cost benefit analysis, it says just what you said. Right. What I mean is that I feel a lot more comfortable with what you said than what I read. That is having a de minimis, so that minor speed reductions on only a subset of a road don't have to go through all the cost benefit process. I'll be very happy.
Just to follow on from that, would that include the rural residential roads, Jane or Bill? Yep. Councillor O'Neill Stevens.
Yeah, question that'll probably turn into a comment following an answer is just relative to the previous rules we've had around the setting of speed limits. How does this compare in regards to its, I guess, specificity for what we can set road speed limits at?
Who's going to answer that one? Bill?
Yeah, through the chair, it has a similar number of specific rules, but probably a narrower range of speeds for those specific roads.
Yeah, I guess my sort of the element that I think is currently missing from the submission is some commentary around the fact that a number of these rules essentially strip our councils and our community's ability to make decisions on the speeds that they want to see. And I think there needs to be some comment on the principle of localism within this document, maybe within sort of the overview. I think broadly the responses to each of those clauses is really strong. But I do think we need to be giving a wider commentary on the fact that actually, you know, a lot of these questions are ones that at least I believe we should be asking and answering.
Just further to Rohan's point about what are the differences between the old rule and the current rule and the proposed rule, just in way of, for example. So the previous rule had limits for local streets and activity streets, but now that's been and those local streets could go down to 30 kilometres an hour, and activity streets could be 30 to 40. Now that's all lumped into urban streets, and all those, the only limit for urban street is 50. So especially in the urban areas, you've got further restrictions. Urban connectors, it was 50 to 60. Now that's gone to 50 to 80. It's less so for the rural areas. Rural roads could have gone down to 60 to 80. Yeah, just for example.
Right, where do we need to go now? Any further
I was
question or comment around the detail?
Yeah, I was interested in why we were taking a submission position that speed limits be in 20 kilometre/hour increments, and was a bit nervous of that. 50 kilometres an hour. I'm absolutely of a view they need to be a bit standardised. Otherwise, 55, 57, how far do you go? But 50 kilometres an hour has been a standardised, limit in urban areas since Adam was a cowboy. Are we arguing in having 20 kilometre/hour increments for the most part that we would be removing the most common urban speed limit of 50 kilometres an hour?
Bill?
Yeah. Through the chair, I think that there is, I guess we were aiming for, as we said, the most part, and that doesn't necessarily mean 20, 40, 60. It could be 30, 50, 70. And then maybe up to 80 and 100. So there is an area where there will be a 10K division or increment, but certainly that having 11 different speeds available from sort of 10Ks to 110 seems too many, and has, for people to identify what the speed limit is on a particular road when there's a possibility of it either being 40, 50 or 60 seems challenging for drivers.
When I read the draft rule, I thought the government was attempting to try and get away from the very problem you point out, and that is, people get quite frustrated of a whole lot of signs going up and down speed limits and excessively so. I just don't know whether our recommendation fairly expresses our response to that, because I want to be pretty supportive of that. I think that's a fair point in the approach to it.
Through the chair, the current rule actually says have speeds. You can have the lower limits at 10, 20, 30 under 50, but then it goes 60, 80, 100. So the current rule was trying to get rid of the 70s and 90s, so to remove the element of confusion at the higher speeds.
And you're wanting our submission to be supportive of that.
We haven't, sorry, through the chair, we haven't gone into detail of how that is best done, but certainly suggesting that the 20 kilometre/hour increments make more sense than 10 kilometre/hour increments.
Mm-hmm.
And certainly open to rewording that.
Again, I'm in that headspace where I'm more comfortable with the words that we've had from our officers than what's in the submission.
Yeah.
But don't want to try and micromanage you. But if that wording in 10, I just thought was and sometimes this is because you're trying to abbreviate into a short box, and in the abbreviation you lose some of the meaning. I think it's a reasonably important point, and so can we just ask our officers to expand out 10 to say more of what you said? My thing is in the abbreviation we've lost some of the nuance of what you were saying.
Right, I saw some activity over here.
Yeah, sorry, through the chair. We were just trying to record the tweaks you want us to make under the authorization for editing. And I think the last two are okay. I just want to check the point the Deputy Mayor Nelson Rohan was making around the local decision making. So am I right? You are advocating for more power for local decision making? Is that what the main point?
That was my main thrust, yeah.
Thank you. Right, with that, I think unless anyone's got it, councillor, do you have your hand up?
Thank you. Yeah, just about the ministerial speed objective.
Sorry, what page you're on?
I'm on page 7 of the report. In the submission.
Yeah, carry on, councillor Bagley.
Yeah, I'm just wondering if it's possible to make that section of the submission a little bit stronger, because, or in the sense that the communities would not be able to be consulted. And it does mention that how they link with other local government obligations regarding consultation and engagement with communities. It does say that there, but I'm just wondering if if there could be a stronger recommendation. We've got that the ministerial objectives be incorporated into the GPS, not the rule. Whether or not there's any other way of any other suggestion that we could, or request we could make around that. Because I think, the scenario of ministerial speed objectives being put out in a random way would mean that really compromise local government and our committee to actually put those into action, because if we go against, would not be within our accepted process. Whether all we can put is that recommendation that material objectives be incorporated into the GPS and not the rule. I mean, we're pretty well saying that trying to control the delivery of ministerial speed objectives, that they don't come out randomly, but maybe we could actually add in some words that they are issued in a systematic way.
Well, I guess the concern there is that how often is the GPS going to be coming out? Because
3 yearly through the chair.
How often these changes be?
Well, the GPS must be issued 3 yearly, and we've unfortunately had more than one GPS issued in that 3-year period due to changes in government. I guess I'd observe that 6 years ago, making speed limits changes was pretty straightforward. and it's become quite a political football over the last 2 governments, and now we have ministerial speed objectives. I guess one point to consider is whether you have them at all. Whether in fact we're overcooking the regulation of speed management in the country or not. In which case an alternative to 6 would be or not have them.
I think we need to be quite open to what's occurred. And what has occurred is that government officers and councils have overreached on the extent to which they have put speed limits in place, and there's been a strong reaction from the community. And that strong reaction is reflected in the issue becoming politicised, the change of government that occurred last year, and we've got it as well. You just need to read the submissions, which were so strongly opposed to the speed limit. So how we're going to try and get this issue into a more nuanced and sensible place is for us to make sure that we keep close to our communities and don't get ourselves to the point where we get that level of kickback. We overreached, we've had a kickback, and then we're just got to try and make sure that we get it settled back down into a good common sense space.
I quite agree, Mr. Mayor. My point was that a future government that isn't a national-led government could do the opposite with the GPS, with the ministerial directive. So that was my point about it being potentially exacerbating the back and forwards.
Because the bit that sits me as strange is that, and I went back and looked it up, is the previous government took away the discretion of councils to set speed limits. The previous government said you've got to do what you're told, and here's the new directions. And at that point, both the Nelson and Tasman Council says, we think that's great. And then there's a change of government and they want to do something different. Now we're saying it's awful. Well, I'm sorry, that's got a little bit of logical inconsistency about it.
I'll go to Councillor Neil I'll come to you, Councillor Neil Stevens.
I was just going to say I would be supportive of advocating for no ministerial directive as it relates to speed. I think the setting a speed limit rule in 2022 is interesting in that it did come really was driven by advocacy from local councils of saying we don't want to have to go through a bylaw process every time we want to change the setting of speed. What we got, whether that was perfect, I certainly wouldn't say that it was, although I think it's fair to reflect that it was a rule that had a much wider degree of ranges to which we could set speeds. It had clear advice, but it had a range in which we could still set speed limits of 50 kilometres an hour. We could also set them at 30. The current advice is that we can set them at 50. That range and that freedom of local decision making has been taken away. And I think it is important to comment on that, regardless of whether or not we would have used it. In the same way, I think it would be fair to comment. I guess the question here is fundamentally, what is central government's role in the setting of speed limits? Is it setting advice and guidance and bottom lines, or is it in telling us what the speed limits have to be? Because really that's the shift between these two setting of speed limit rules.
Thank you. Right. We think we've raised a number of issues around this submission, but I think I get the feeling that we're generally supportive with some smaller tweaks. There is a resolution, isn't there? Shall we test the water and see how we go? I'll move the resolutions to authorise and approve the submission. Jane.
Before you do that, Chair, I was just wondering if we needed to add an extra bullet point about the ministerial.
The one we've just been talking about, ministerial speed objectives, to give you the opportunity to have a look at that.
Because that would be that's separate from the last bullet point you've got there.
Yeah, and that can be covered in the minor edits then.
It could, but I guess that what we're looking for is guidance on whether we leave what's there, water it down, or strengthen it, because there is some diversity of view in the committee. Yeah.
Can I just check in? Was the concern from officials about their ministerial speed objectives the frequency with which they can do them? Well, at least with the GPS, there's a chunk, ka-chunk, ka-chunk when they come into effect, or the fact that they were separate to the GPS. Where were officials coming from that they could be continuously messed with?
Yeah, through the chair, there is the possibility that even through a term of government, the minister might change, and there is a new minister that has a different set of objectives that arrive, 18 months after the GPS. So in terms of putting them within the GPS means that the whole transport government or the government's policy on transport generally, including speeds, is covered at that point.
So would it be appropriate just to try and find a solution that in the event that the ministerial objectives are not incorporated in the rule, that the new speed setting rules have a limit on how frequency, but they shall not be updated more frequently than once every 3 years or 5 years, something of that. So there's some stability in the regime of which councils can work with.
Through the chair, just the other aspect is that the GPS has a process of it's consulted on, there's an opportunity for feedback. There's very little context as to what the process is for establishing these ministerial speed objectives. And my reading of the recommendation was that actually you don't need ministerial speed objectives, that the minister has a GPS mechanism where they can provide that strategic direction for the transport network over that 3-year period. So why would we not utilise that mechanism rather than something that appears quite open-ended in the way it's currently written? So rather than creating a whole new framework and us providing feedback about how often they come out and who should be consulted in the process, are we simply better to say, well, actually, we're not sure you need them. Use the existing mechanisms to make these points. We understand the GPS is consulted on. It comes out on a 3-yearly cycle with the exception of changes when we have a change of government. So do we actually need this mechanism full stop?
Understand.
Where does that leave us though? What do we want to do?
Oh, my suggestion is that the submission at the moment says that ministerial objectives be incorporated in the impress, not the rule. You could add, if you wished, onto the end of it. But if it is going to be a separate ministerial objective, that there be a time limit on how frequently it can be changed.
Yeah, that's. Yes, because we're not sure where this is going to end up through submissions is some of the issue, isn't it?
Correct.
Yeah. So you've got all of the parts.
Yeah, through the chair. So what we haven't captured the mayor's last comment there. So it would be removing the advocating for no ministerial directive, leaving the text in as it is, and instead replacing the red text there with or a limit of changes, including advocating for no more than a.
The language I would use would be if ministerial speed objectives are included, that there be a limit on how frequently they can be changed. Objectives. That there be a limit on how frequently they can be changed. On how frequently they can be changed.
Right, Councillor Butler, did you have a further point?
Sorry, yeah, just like is the intention to go and speak to this submission or?
I don't think.
Sorry.
I don't think this is not legislation. So
Oh, okay, yeah.
so we only have the opportunity to make a written submission. On most of these transport documents, we don't get to make oral submissions. Unless is anybody got incorrect? Nope.
There's been no indication that there's a oral submission part of this process.
We're going to have this in by Thursday, is it? So we're virtually doing it on the fly, which I'm not a big fan. There. By committee, it's always challenging.
Yeah, I might just comment on that last one. Look, the key thing that staff really want to give us some stability in the setting of speed limit rules and stuff like that. And I think that's something anyone who's gone through this process would advocate for. So, it doesn't bounce back and forward. I'm comfortable that the submission, especially with the addition, supports that.
I would love, and I think it would be a consensus view, for us to put a very specific bullet point along those lines. That's the last bullet point's a bit nerdy and down to a very specific point, which is fair enough. But I wonder, I think there's a broad view around the table where we say in our submission that speed limits has become too polarised and too politicised. Council officers are struggling to make progress with the continuous change of rules. The objective should be to try and move to a point where the process is less political and there's a greater degree of stability.
Yeah, we probably, as slow as someone's got a note of it, we don't need that.
Yeah.
It's the last one.
Oh, you do want it up there? Just, yeah. Carry on, Elaine, sorry.
I actually think this is a political statement and worthy of including in our list. So
Yeah.
yeah.
So I would say commentary that speed limits have become too polarized and political. That council officials are struggling to administer the continuous changing rules from both the previous government and current government. And that urge that the overriding objective is to get a more stable regime for local authorities to administer.
Very good. Councillor Butler, did you have something before? No, Councillor Ellis, so I wasn't sure of this council.
Sorry, I just wanted to, the point that actually dovetails quite nice with Rohan's point about the local decision making.
Yes, that's true. Perhaps they can be incorporated together. Councillor O'Neill Stevens.
I apologize for this. I don't have the words in front of me, but I will always take issue with calling things too political. I'm happy with polarized, but unless we want to hand speed limit setting off to a technocracy and just down to officers, it'll always be political. And I'm not sure that that's the goal of the advocacy present.
That speed limits have become too polarized. How about too polarized and contentious?
Yeah, I'm happy with that. Politics doesn't have to be bad.
I love the young idealism. The difference.
Got to remind their enthusiasm. Right. I think we could keep tweaking this for quite some time, and there's still an opportunity. Because will you run this final submission past me and Nick and myself before you send it off on Thursday? I'm just wondering when I'm going to have time to read it, but it wants to be in the middle of the night.
Yes, correct. So we'll incorporate those. So there's some of them are just noting as opposed to the text. Reflect them in the submission. In fact, I've got one, but I'll talk to you about it offline. That's more context setting for the process we've just been through. And get your approval for those changes in the next day or so.
Sounds good. So yeah, but there is 3 resolutions with 3 particularly having a number of amendments. Does anyone want to have them been moved, Robin? I'll move. Do we have a seconder? Mayor Smith. Anyone want to have any discussion?
Can I just check on this one? I'm sorry if I'm a slow learner.
Yeah.
Can I just check on this one, because sometimes I'm a slow learner. This submission is going directly from the Joint Regional Transport Committee and is not going back to either of the 2 councils. Is that correct?
That's my understanding, but I'll stand corrected.
Correct, and we've included both the mayor's names in there to give it a bit of gravitas, and also Tim is an ex officio member, and obviously the mayor of Tasman. So yeah, trying to get as many hitters on the signature line as possible.
I think Stuart's a heavier hitter. And you can take that any way you like.
Right, Councillor O'Neill Stevens.
Yeah, just on debate on this one is I'm very supportive of where this submission's landed. I think really key to the setting of speed limits, as we've just experienced going through our process, is local decision making and actually communities having reflecting the fact that roads serve essentially as extensions of place. They make up a huge amount of our urban area. They make up a huge amount of our city centres, and oftentimes they extend to be places of civic function as well, whether that be for events or protests or anything else. They are really collectively owned and collectively paid for, and it's local communities that need to have control over decision making. One of my biggest concerns with the rule as it stands is I was up in Raglan last weekend, a place where almost all of the roads are 30 kilometres an hour. Now, under this rule, it would suggest that all of those roads should be 50 kilometres an hour. Is it to their benefit economically? I don't know. What I do know is that it creates a great vibe for that community and matches their aspirations. And actually, I think that communities should have the right. We, as Nelson City Council, should and did have the right to set a 30 kilometre an hour limit in our city centre. That was the right thing to do. We need to be really consistent at pushing back on the removal of local voice and local decision making on these issues that are so intertwined with our experience of place. And so really happy to support this submission and would urge the government to consider who's best positioned to make those decisions. Individuals in Wellington or the communities on the ground actually who have to live with those decisions every single day.
Thank you, Councillor O'Neill Stevens. Any further speakers? If not, just before I put it, just like to thank the staff for their work done getting the submission prepared for us, and obviously the work you're going to do tweaking it. And then we'll see if we can get it approved in a way in time later in the week. So thanks for all the work that's gone on to do that. So I'll put the resolutions. All those in favour will please say aye. Aye. Against? Carried. Thank you. Does that bring us to the end, Dwayne? Carried here. That'd be appreciated.
Kia hika te korero, kia wātia, kia mama te manawa o te tangata, kia o te ke te ara mō tātou, e ore nei, e rongo ki ronga, kia tina, hui e, tai ki e. Let the discussions be lifted, clear away the ease and hearts of people, keep focus on the path of life, peace is upheld, say yes, bind together, and so it is. Ka pai.
Thank you. Thank you all for your attendance and enthusiastic input, and safe travels home.